Thank you all for coming today. I want to welcome you to the 2018 Madeleine Albright Women in Politics Luncheon. And I was just saying to somebody, you know, most of us have been together for the last 15 years coming to this lunch, and everyone seems to love it so much. It's a great opportunity to talk to and hear from women who've made great strides to take their rightful place in politics and policy making. No matter where they're from, what country they're from, what religion they practice, or what issues they campaign on. Part of NDI's global mission is to get more women in office everywhere. We work in over 60 countries, and what we try to do is give women the tools, the encouragement, and the ideas they need to break down the barriers that keep them from getting into politics. 2 years ago, NDI and our chairman, Madeleine Albright, launched the Not the Cost call to action and campaign to stop violence against politically active women. You know, the sad reality is the more gains women make in political life and assume positions of power, the more they experience acts of violence, physical and sexual assault, cyberbullying, harassment, and discrimination. This morning, my colleague Sandra Papera hosted a conference at GW University before a packed house of women to talk about these issues. And she was joined by 10 remarkable politicians from around the world who came here today to share their real-life experiences and to discuss how they're fighting against violence against women in their own countries. We're really fortunate to have these women here with us, and I'd like to take just a few seconds to ask each one of them to stand up so they can be recognized, and if you can hold your applause until they've all been introduced. So first, I'm not sure everyone's sitting. I'd like to introduce Seyi Akewowo, a local councillor from the UK. Rosanna Dinamarco, a member of parliament from Sweden. Carmen Alanis, a former electoral judge from Mexico. Carmen. Nino Gogawedze, sorry for butchering your last name, a member of parliament from Georgia. Thank you, Nina. Rowena Guanzon, a member of the Philippine Election Commission. Hakima El Haite, a former member of parliament and minister and the incoming president of the Liberal International from Morocco. Mimosa Kusade Laila, a member of parliament, former mayor from Kosovo. Fatima Mina Baide, a mayor from Honduras. Farida Bemba Naborema from Togo. And Catherine Noon, a senator from Ireland. Thank you all for being here and making this such an important day. Thank you. Okay, I also need to thank a few other folks, so bear with me. First, I want to recognize our board of directors whose leadership and commitment and support are central to the mission of NDI. And again, I would like to ask those board members who are here to stand so that we can show our appreciation. Bernie Aronson, Patty Babbitt, Elizabeth Bagley, Rai Barkott, Joan Kalambakidis, Robin Carnahan, Tom Daschle, Susie George, Catherine Hall, Rochelle Horowitz, Rick Inderfirth, Rob Liberatore, Lionel Johnson, Eric Kessler, Barbara Mikulski, Jim O'Brien, Maureen White, and Tamara Wittes. Thank you. That's an amazing board. Thank you all for being with us. Okay, a few more minutes. Also with us are board and members, staff members from the National Endowment for Democracy and our affiliated institutes, the Solidarity Center, SIPE, the International Republican Institute, and IFAS. We are so proud to be part of this larger democracy relationship. And we appreciate those of you who came from the State Department and USAID. You are our partners and indispensable support network around the globe. And a few other new friends of NDI who made this event possible, members of NDI's affinity groups, the Chairman's Council, the Ambassadors Circle, the Equal Voices for Democracy group, the Alumni group, and the New York Advisory Council, as well as the many other supporters who are in your program and on the big screen. A special note of thanks to Ambassador Colleen Bell, whose support sponsored the forum this morning at GW. Thank you, Colleen. And also the John P. and Ann Welsh McNulty Foundation for their generous support of the Madeleine Albright Leadership Project. Now, a special note, I want us all to remember Andy Parhamovich. For those of you who don't know Andy, she worked for NDI in Iraq. 11 years ago, she was killed when her convoy was attacked when she was returning from a political party training session in Baghdad. In her honor, NDI established the Andy Parhamovich Fellowship, and it reflects Andy's dedication to women, women in politics, to democracy, and to reconciliation between people of different ideologies and faiths. We're honored this year to have with us, and I'm not sure where they're sitting, Andy's mom, Vicki, her sister, Marcy, her nieces, Kayla and Abby, and her close friend, Jamie. Thank you for being here. And lastly, and I promise this is the end, I want to recognize NDI's president, Ken Wallach, who provides leadership and vision. At NDI and constantly reminds us that women should be at the forefront of our programs. And while she will be introduced more properly, our chairman, Madeleine Albright, our in-house foreign policy expert, best-selling author, global inspiration to women around the world, and democracy rock star. Thank you both. Now, please join me. We're going to turn the lights down for just a second, watch a short video, and then you will hear from our first panel hosted by my colleague, Sandra Papera. Thank you.
One time, I was out there campaigning in a community, and a group of opposition members came and hit me, pulled my hair, and threatened me that if I would continue with campaigning, I was to be killed.
Going into politics in Pakistan brings with it many risks, especially for women. For me, I have faced death threats from the Taliban and other extremist groups. I receive online abuse, both sexual as well as threats to my life to this day.
I was very critical in the article, and then the next day, the headquarters of my party was surrounded by security forces. So we were stuck in the headquarters, no way to get out, no way to get in.
Those menaces that sometimes that go on media, social media, private messages on the inbox, with time, they have even become reality.
You all. That somber video that you just watched really encapsulates some of the behaviors that many of the women we meet around the world face on a daily basis as they try to do their job, participate, vote, run councils, just for being active in politics. It's entirely appropriate that we have had the forum this morning, and we're going to have this short panel as part of the salute to our indefatigable chairwoman, Madeleine Albright, because she championed this cause 2 years ago when we said to her, we need somebody to be the face of this campaign and to talk to the United Nations about it. She said, cool, I'll be there. And she was in New York with us. And because of the call that she made of the United Nations, this year, for the first time ever, the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls will present a report to the UN General Assembly on the issue of violence against women in politics. This is a remarkable success for the campaign, and we are thrilled and excited to still have Secretary Albright's leadership with us. This morning, well, no, it's afternoon now, I'm sorry, we've had a long day already. I'm with three of the women who are part of our network who epitomize what courage and adversity really means. Those of you who were at the forum this morning will have heard from them already. But let me introduce them briefly, and then we'll get to a couple of rounds of questions. We're not trying to get between you and your lunch. But you've heard their names already. Mimosa is currently an MP in Kosovo and has been a councilwoman and a deputy prime minister, minister of finance. She's been in politics a long time, founded her own party just because the party system was so toxic. Fatima Beiramena from Honduras is a councillor in the second biggest city, San Pedro Sula. She's also been a National Assembly member in Honduras and actually took a decision to step back from the national level to the local level because of some of the threats that she faced. She's also founded a political party, the Anti-Corruption Party in Honduras, and anybody who knows Honduras understands what courage that takes. And then to my extreme left, Shei Akiwawa, who was until last Thursday a local councillor in Newham, which is one of the toughest boroughs in London, and her experience as a young black woman, left-wing, progressive politician has also put her very much in the line of fire. So let me start actually and say that all of you have been party people. What's going wrong with the political parties? Let me start with you, Mimosa.
Thank you, Sandra. Greetings to everyone. When we talk about importance of women engagement in democracy, in political parties, when women who have the will and courage to engage face difficulties, face violence, face death threat, something that I faced and experienced during my tenure as a first woman mayor in Kosovo, political parties tend to shake your belief in a system if they're not supportive enough. I did not find the real support and real democracy within the party that I was belonging at the same time. And it was all about the values and what they represent. And parties at least in fragile democracies as ours, don't do the open support for women in their political parties just for one thing, because they want votes of other men and people who actually are probably part of the problem, not part of the solution. And by this is saying that, okay, I've been through so much and I've gone through these, I mean, as a nation, we've gone through a very problematic process of building the democracy, creating a state. You actually realize that, well, we need to build the system correctly and properly, with proper values. This is why myself and a few other young people in Kosovo decided to form a new political party, his new liberal democratic party called Alternativa, and I was elected to chairwoman. And then you realize that when you set properly procedures and standards, not even quotas are important anymore, because you have women and youth engaged and you have their participation active.
Fatima, you were on the film, and all of us who've heard your story, I still get chills when I remember you talking about the little blue pickup truck that circles your neighborhood the whole time, and the sorts of intimidation you've faced. Is it worth it?
Well, most definitely it is. But in this process, I would have to bring out that one of the most important things that I faced is creating awareness of what was going on and not seeing it as a small incident. Putting names to it when you're not giving the floor in Congress, or they want to take the seat away from you just because you're a woman, or when they use abusive language, especially relating to stereotype comments. Those are not normal things, and those are not just incidents. For a lot of time, I did not pay attention to them, or I decided to ignore them. So for a long time, I went surviving and surviving, but there was something was wrong within me. And I knew that what was going on was not correct, but I really didn't know how to face that problem. And the frustration of not knowing what's going on with you, if it's okay to feel bad, to feel uncomfortable, and people saying, see, you're a woman, you're not fit for it. Mm-hmm. Really, it's very disturbing. Until the point where, thanks to all the campaigns, all the programs that are held that start giving you these instruments, and putting names to those incidents you've been going through, and understanding that it's not correct, I would say that self-awareness is one of the most beautiful things that have ever happened to me. Because self-awareness gave me the courage, the bravery that I needed and I couldn't find for so many years to break the fears, to break the silence, to ignore what they say about being loyalty to your leaders, the repercussions you could have within your party, and then getting strong enough and loud enough to say, I'm not gonna let this happen. And this is something cultural that needs to be changed, and I'm gonna be out there. And once you're loud and once you're strong and once you have this conviction, then you see that what you're saying, no democratic person or can really go against what you're saying. So putting it out there, self-awareness, and worrying about the women standing out there has been, for me, one of the most valuable things I've received in all this campaign and efforts that I know many of you sitting out here have done for me and for women standing around the globe.
Right. Shay, you faced a torrent of online abuse, and I know I've heard you say a number of times already, you know, robust debate is one thing, but what you faced had nothing to do with robust political debate. And you've also established this NGO about training the next generation. Yeah. Tell us your story and how you intend to contribute to raising, I think you said something like, the next generation should become better online, digital citizens.
Yeah. So I've shared this story this morning, so apologies if you've heard it already, but I accidentally stood to be a councillor at 22, not really understanding what I was getting myself in for. And I guess being quite different to your typical councillors, we have an average age of councillors in the UK is about 56. It got better over 10 years, so props to us. And it tends to be obviously male and retired and obviously middle class. So being such a young person, I'm black, and I'm a woman, it was like, wow, what is going on here? And I said it before, I used the wave and a lot of the publicity that came with it to try and champion other young women of colour to enter politics, because representation does matter and caring about your community does matter. And as Sandra said, I represented one of the toughest areas of London. We've seen 13, 14, 15-year-olds die, or being stabbed or being killed. We've seen a massive increase in youth violence, and we wasn't seeing anybody that cared about those issues on the council. And through the wave of, I guess, popularity and getting a blue tick on Twitter and hopefully meeting Idris Elba, I've overshared already my crush, so I might as well share it with you guys. I was invited to go to European Parliament to share my experience and my expertise around how we're going to engage more young people in politics. This was before Brexit, so I probably didn't do the best of jobs. And it was at that time where I'm in the hemicycle, where it was about bringing nations that used to have a lot of wars with each other and fight each other in there around solidarity. The French National were there, and they were booing this refugee on the panel, saying that he should go home or immigrants should go home. And there was a rage in me, particularly coming from like the hood, right? That was like, I'm going to stick up for this person. I'm going to say something. I didn't know what I was going to say, but what I said ended up being filmed, ended up being shared online by the European Parliament and went viral. So it was like 1.5 million views. And you know something goes viral when you've got aunties on WhatsApp sending you the video saying, is this you? And all of that was great because, again, it was great to share that it's important to get more young people into politics and that democracy doesn't work if it doesn't represent people. But on the 1st of February, I was in the gym getting summer body ready, and all of a sudden I was just getting these floods of abuse on Twitter and on YouTube, various forms of the N-word. I never knew there were so many forms of the N-word. Being lynched, get hanged, you monkey, Harimbe's cousin, stuff to do with my body parts, being exterminated, death threats, and it was relentless for weeks on end. And I just was in a state of shock, and I thought, well, this isn't right. And I know there's a lot of women that have faced this kind of abuse before, so what are we going to do to fix it? There just seems to be a glitch, because I used the online platforms to get elected, to share what I'm doing, to be held accountable by people that voted for me. I used it to engage generations into politics, and I couldn't believe that platform that I used so positively was now treating me like that. It kind of felt like I was in this abusive relationship but it was only a technology, it's only a platform, but it was deep for me. And then through the kind of exploration of what happened, I realized there were a lot of women that were going through this, and I said, we need to fix the glitch. There's a glitch in the system. We need to hold social media companies accountable for what's happening on their platform. Decision makers need to beef up their legal framework so that women, when they report it, it is taken seriously. And finally, we need to raise the next generation of young people to say, look, this is not how you behave online. Understand that your words have power. It's not robust debate. If you want to argue with me, I will argue with you gladly. But when you now insult me because of my skin color, because of my gender, that is no longer robust debate. That is your attempt to try and silence me, but it won't work. And we have to tell other women. Hey! It won't work, but I also worry that there are generations of young women that are looking at me thinking, well, I'm not going to get into politics if this is what it's like. And so that's why I set up Glitch, because we need to tell people how to use the online space positively. We need to generate a generation of young people that are using online platforms positively. And we've spoken to 1,200 young people, majority boys, because that's where the problems are. And we've told them about how you can use your phones more positively. And schools come back and tell us, like, kids are different. Their behavior is different now. They understand about WhatsApp and tweeting and cyberside. They understand the consequences, and we need to do that on a global level. Online citizenship is so important.
Great. Mimosa, you're a runner, and you've used that metaphor a lot. The road, the sprint, the marathon.
Yes.
Is it going to take a really long time?
It's certainly an ultra marathon, I would say. Absolutely not a sprint, not even a marathon now when I look at it. I personally had made an analogy. Yes, I'm a runner. I've been running for many years, and recently, and when I was a mayor, I was trying in the most devastating, running a municipality that was the most devastating during the war. Had the highest number of people killed. And once you're in office, you realize that you need to do much more than just build up things. Promoting healthy lifestyle occurred to me to be one of the platforms and means to actually raise awareness about the importance of healthy mind and healthy body. Actually, it didn't work the same way that I planned. People start using, the political opponents start using running against me. They thought, I run early in the morning at 5 a.m., talking about how this is the only thing I do, despite the fact that municipality was having so many successes. And then I realized one other thing, that in politics, men and women are portrayed differently. If I was a man mayor, I would have been strong, multitasking, devoted. Everyone would envy a man mayor waking up at 5 a.m., running, doing his thing, and then being successful in office. But women was just too much to handle. You know, she can do running. Municipality was doing very good. Most transparent municipality in Kosovo. For 4 years, actually, in a row, we were getting from non-governmental organization. We had the highest number of international donations committed to our municipality. And as I said once 2 years ago, actually in New York, you keep throwing stones at me and I keep paving roads with them. Apparently, apparently someone along the road was actually building a wall to stop me. So here comes the new election time, and I lost last year, very narrow margin, to a candidate who was from the same party from whom I won the municipality and the same political party of our prime minister now. But I realized that, you know, there is a graciousness in losing as well, because now it's been 5 months since the governments have changed and things have gone south. But you also realize one thing. In fragile democracy, you have to feed democracy. It's not enough just doing the right thing. You have to talk about doing the right thing. You have to talk to people, because if we're not feeding the democracy, they're feeding ignorance and they're feeding authoritarian regime. We forget. We tend to take democracy for granted, thinking that things are good. This is what happened in my municipality. People thought, okay, we're free. There's so many initiatives going on. We have different programs coming from different organizations. All we need now is jobs, which the other person were saying, yeah, I'll employ you. I'll find you a job. I'll find you a job. I will not say that, because that was not true. You can't just promise jobs like that. You need to have a program for jobs. And in this, you realize that, okay, what do you do with this wall in front of you? You climb and you start tearing it down, because I have to open path for other women as well. I don't want to sound desperate nor pessimistic, but I just realized the same as in a marathon. You're running 26 miles. At 20th miles, you feel like you've lost everything. You have no energy, and you keep asking yourself, why am I doing this again? But you understand at the finish line, the glory when crossing the finish line, going over the hurdle. I'm a member of parliament now. I sponsored an article in the business organization law that puts a quota for business organization. 40% needs to be women in boards of business organizations. Parliament passed it, President returned it. Now I have to lobby more to get 61 votes, but I'm not stopping, because the question is, where are you going to find equal and well-trained women to serve on business boards, on business organization or business corporation boards? And I'm like, do you think all the men that are serving are capable now? I mean, this is a joke. Every time we talk about women position, it comes about their professionalism and how capable they are.
But let's switch roles. How about to talk about the men and what are their qualifications if they're holding a position? So yes, it's an ultra marathon, and I'm sure we'll cross the finish line successfully.
Fatima, I think one of the key things for you has been the fact that you went to the authorities, you told them what was happening, and I think you've said that actually to this day, nobody has ever come back to you to say, this case you filed, this is what we're doing with it. What is that like, not to be taken seriously?
That's one of the biggest gaps that I have faced and identified within the system, because we're always talking about, I'm 100% the importance of passing like legislation and creating awareness. But when I was physically assaulted, this is a felony. We don't need a new law for that. I mean, this is something in a public place with leaders, media, and everything. So when I decided to step forward and go to the local authorities, it was incredible. I mean, they wouldn't attend me. And going through the process of waiting for the physician that had to make sure that he was going to evaluate me, I had read so many times all the re-victimization that women that face violence went through, and I was there in that. Can you imagine in a Honduras, in this alone country, no one there, everyone looking at me weird, like, why is this woman out here? And I was really not, there was no awareness, there was no sensibilization, but there was no instrument on how to understand what I was facing. Till this day, I have never, ever gotten a notice or a call from any authority following up on my case. It's completely gone. Last time I went, like 2 months ago, I went just to check if it had moved from the station to maybe a different office, and no one knows where that is. So then this raises the question. I mean, there's impunity here. How can we say we're going to go changing our context if it's so obvious that at that time I was serving in Congress, I was a very active candidate. It went through all the media, so everyone knew I had been assaulted. I had been a victim of violence, and no one, not even the authorities, which had the obligation to go on this, ever attended. So definitely there's a big path to be from the governmental side, from the authority side, to address correctly this issue.
And Che, in 1 minute, yesterday you made a very sort of interesting link. This business we talk about online, offline, and the blurring of the boundaries. Just speak to that, but in 1 minute.
I totally understand in a legal framework the need to categorize things and box things, and so things that are in the offline space needs kind of the laws there, and what is online as well, and tech and stuff. There's required laws there. But when you're a victim and a survivor of online abuse, you're not in those categories. You're forever jumping between those two, because when the abuse was happening online, it affected my offline world. I then had to go to the police. My plans for the week changed. I became more paranoid. Those were things that were happening to me physically in my offline world, but yes, it was happening online. And I think also the online world as well has many rooms to it. Women are not only being harassed on Twitter, they tend to be harassed on other platforms at the same time. In my experience, very, very quickly, the video of the speech that went viral was put on a neo-Nazi website. The leaders of that website were recruiting, not sure if they were getting paid a minimum wage, but recruiting trolls to troll me all the time across multiple platforms. So this legal framework needs to take into account, we're talking about a multi-dimension online, offline reality.
Great, thank you. That's it.
It gives me great pleasure to introduce Nazanin Boniadi, a woman of extraordinary talents. She is a versatile actor. She played a Jewish slave in the remake of Ben-Hur, portrayed a hostage in the movie Hotel Mumbai, an Afghan refugee in Charlie Wilson's War, a news reporter in Afghanistan in Iron Man, and a Muslim CIA analyst in Homeland. Nazanin now stars in Counterpart, a series that is built around the idea that there is a parallel universe hidden from the world by a Berlin-based United Nations spy agency. I don't know if they have black helicopters. In her other, more realistic life, she is a University of California Irvine graduate, where she received an undergraduate, yes, an undergraduate research award for her work in heart transplant rejection and cancer research. Now, I know what you are thinking. These are subjects that we were all too familiar with during our college days. She is not yet, and I say yet, a real doctor, but somewhat surprisingly, she has not played one on television, although she once was a nurse on General Hospital. But even most impressive is Nazanin's off-the-set work and dedication as a human and women's rights activist. She is an outspoken advocate for the rights of women in Iran, her country of birth during the height of the revolution, and has served as a spokesperson for Amnesty International. She currently is a board member at the Center for Human Rights in Iran and a term member of the Council on Foreign Relations. We recognize her accomplishments on screen and her deep and abiding commitment to women and human rights globally. Please join me in welcoming Nazanin Boniadi.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. Madam Secretary, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for letting me speak about something I'm extremely passionate about today, and I'm deeply inspired by the women who were speaking earlier. Some of you may know me as an actress, and that's a job in which I get to study and portray the human condition. But the role I'm most proud of is my role as an activist, in which, hopefully, I get to change the human condition. And as we've started openly discussing since October 2017 and the inception of the Me Too movement, the condition we, particularly as women, find ourselves in is one that desperately needs to change. This movement is not simply about the power of a hashtag gone viral. It's about the contagion of courage. What started with a few brave women speaking truth to power in the entertainment industry inspired more and more women across various fields to find their voices and to stand in their power. This not only led to the empowering awareness that we are not alone, but also to the sobering realization that despite women's suffrage and apparent legal equality in the US, women in sports, politics, news, and almost every occupation are suffering from widespread workplace harassment and abuse. I, like many of you, have had my fair share of Me Too moments, but for me, the struggle for women's rights started when I was born in Tehran, in the direct aftermath of the Iranian Revolution. My parents realized the dangers of raising a daughter in a social, political, and legal climate that was growing increasingly oppressive toward women and girls. Although they fled to London when I was just 3 weeks old, becoming refugees as Secretary Albright's parents were, the challenges facing women's rights in Iran became ingrained in my social consciousness. And after traveling across Iran in my early teens, I knew I had to use my voice to promote theirs. On December 27, 2017, a brave Iranian woman named Vida Movahed, a 31-year-old mother, stood peacefully on a utility box in the middle of a busy Tehran sidewalk, and silently waved her government-mandated veil from the end of a stick. This basic freedom that women take for granted in nearly every country in the world, the feeling of the wind on your bare head, is illegal in the Islamic Republic of Iran. Movahed's defiant act came on the eve of national anti-government protests in Iran, fueled by widespread economic, social, and political discontent. She quickly disappeared after her images went public, and it was later reported she had been arrested. She was released on bail a month later, but her bravery has inspired dozens of women throughout Iran, old and young, veiled and unveiled, to engage in or support the same act of civil disobedience, standing bareheaded in public as they silently wave their scarves. Since January, at least 30 people, mostly women, have been arrested for this act. The courage of these women has been contagious and garnering additional momentum with the social media hashtag Girls of Revolution Street. To be clear, this Iranian movement didn't happen overnight, and the plight of the Iranian woman runs far deeper than challenging compulsory clothing regulations. However, for many women in Iran, the hijab has become a constant reminder of their inequality and oppression in a social, political, and religious climate that favors men. At the inception of the Islamic Republic 39 years ago, tens of thousands of Iranian women demonstrated in opposition to the new government's compulsory hijab ruling. Their cries were met with batons, lashes, acid thrown in their faces, and imprisonment. Too few Iranian men showed solidarity. But this impulse for gender equality could never be suppressed and has only grown stronger with time. Women's rights activists like Nobel Peace Laureate and human rights lawyer Shirin Ebadi, human rights activist Narges Mohammadi, and human rights lawyer Nasrin Sotoudeh have paved the way for this watershed moment. In opposing Iran's patriarchal and discriminatory system, in which women's court testimony and inheritance is considered half as valuable as that of a man, married women are forbidden from getting a divorce or traveling abroad without their husband's permission, or from becoming judges, members of the Guardian Council, president, or supreme leader. And females convicted of adultery have been subjected to unspeakable cruelty, including stoning. They and countless others have sacrificed their own freedom and security. While it is women's rights defenders inside Iran who are making the most arduous sacrifices to precipitate real change, those outside the country are also trying to do their part. Brooklyn-based journalist and activist Masih Alinejad, who was also imprisoned but eventually managed to leave Iran, launched the popular online movement My Stealthy Freedom in 2014, calling on women in Iran to protest the mandatory hijab by uploading photos of themselves without a headscarf. The campaign's Facebook page has since amassed more than 1 million followers. Alinejad's 2017 White Wednesdays initiative encouraged women in Iran to protest the forced hijab by wearing white clothing and headscarves on Wednesdays. She recently joined the Women's March in New York, notably waving a white scarf on the end of a stick, just as Movahed did. As human rights advocates, we demand that the rights of half the world's population, women, be respected. No one should experience violence or live in fear of it when he or she seeks to access the full range of their human rights. We should open our eyes to the suffering of women and people beyond our borders and jurisdiction. Some might ask why the United States should care about ending gender-based violence around the world. While we know there is much work to be done to end violence against women here at home, we must recognize that the status of women and girls and the stability of nations go hand in hand. Countries with the most discriminatory laws and cultural attitudes towards women tend to also experience the greatest unrest and turmoil, which in turn directly impacts global stability. Indeed, there should be no room for polarization or partisan politics when it comes to human rights. We should be able to equally loudly and in one voice condemn both the Muslim-majority travel ban and forced Islamic dress codes. The freedom of religion does not give one carte blanche to take away other people's freedoms. It is not enough for us to only condemn rights abuses when they fit neatly into our own political narrative. It is time for us to put people before politics and unite on issues pertaining to freedom, justice, and equality. I applaud the tremendous work that NDI is doing on this front. The time of the women's marches, the Me Too movement, and women protesting in Iran is not a coincidence, but a convergence. These episodes are part of a global awakening in women's rights, and these expressions of bravery and civil disobedience must not be viewed as isolated incidents, even if they're not organized under one banner. It is incumbent upon us to acknowledge this moment as an inflection point to bring about real social and cultural change. Otherwise, we risk having our movement forgotten and our moment wasted. I marched in Los Angeles and joined in spirit and solidarity with the women in cities across the world, from Frankfurt to Osaka to Kampala and Buenos Aires. But I also marched for the women in Iran, who are breaking their silence, but at far greater cost. Thank you.
Please welcome NDI board member Maureen White.
Good afternoon, everyone. Before I begin my remarks, I just wanted to say that there are a few of us in this room who returned from Lebanon last night, where NDI was part of an election observation group. And I think you might imagine, as is often the case after events like that or days of visits like that, we are left with enormous respect for the people in this country who are struggling to create a democracy, and very, very much in awe of the work that NDI does to help people struggling with a nascent democracy. And Lebanon surely has its problems. But when I reflected on what I wanted to say about Madeleine this afternoon, I find myself returning to first principles. To things like the basic Declaration of Human Rights, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the recognition of the inherent dignity of every member of the human family, and of our rights and freedoms of expression and thought, and the right to live in a democracy. But the Universal Declaration also talks about our responsibilities. We have a duty to help those who are struggling to find their democratic voice in a complicated world. These values are the core at the life of Madeleine Albright, and thus we are lucky to have her as one of the most ardent, persuasive, credible defenders of these values at a time when they are under attack, not only in faraway places, but even in our own government. As we are reminded by the wisdom of Justice Louis Brandeis, the most important political role in this country is not president or even Secretary of State, it's the role of citizen. Each of us has an opportunity, indeed we have a responsibility, to use whatever platforms we have to articulate and defend the values of democracy and indeed the American identity. So if you're looking for inspiration in your personal journey to make a difference, I offer you Madeleine Albright. Like so many historic figures, her achievements are rooted in a profound personal history. She was born in communist Czechoslovakia. She fled the Nazis in World War II. 3 of her grandparents died in the Holocaust. She is a mother of 3. She's our first female Secretary of State. She's a recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom. She's a professor of diplomacy at Georgetown University, strategic advisor to NATO, and the founder and chair of a global investment strategy group, and the author of 6 New York Times bestsellers. In her most recent book, and I think I have this correct, it was #1 on the New York Times list, is that correct? But in her most recent book, Fascism, a Warning. She reminds us that the values embedded in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights are an essential response to the lessons of World War II, and they act as our guardrail against a recurrence of fascism, and that each of us must do our part to energize the democratic process and to prevent the return of fascism. As our indefatigable chair of the NDI board, Madeleine leads us in that effort, and the values of human dignity are manifest in everything she does in her life. She is tenacious in the face of inertia. She is creative in the face of complexity. A tough taskmaster who inspires us not only with her high ideals, but also her down-to-earth demeanor. She has unflagging loyalty and support of others in their career, especially women. And I have experienced this personally when she invited me a few years ago to join her at an NDI trip in Jordan. There, she took interest in my own work and humanitarian issues, but at the same time, she opened my eyes to a new set of issues dealing with democracy building, which helped to nourish my own understanding of the refugee problem. Indeed, Madeleine's own life is a shining example of what refugees can do when they come to this great country. But more than any paper she has written, or speech that she has given, or negotiation that she has led, her living example of the ideals of human dignity can inspire all of us in our personal and collective efforts to live up to our own responsibility and highest ideals. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our friend, our chair, our mentor, the 64th Secretary of State of the United States, and the leader of this great organization, Madeleine. I needed that too. I was thinking. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Maureen, thank you so much for your introduction, and I truly do want to thank you for everything that you've done in your public life, and that you've just come back from a trip to Lebanon, where I do think that is exactly the kind of thing that we want to see our friends do, and to go to countries and do what NDI does best. And so, Maureen, thank you very, very much for everything that you do and say, and I'm delighted that you're now a member of our board. Always my friend. Thank you. I'm very, very happy to be here this afternoon and see so many familiar faces. This is NDI's 35th year, and nothing makes us prouder than the networks that we have built. And one of the ways that we do that is by inviting people to lunch. So I want to thank Sherry Bryan and James Vanderklok and Ken Wallach and everyone else who is responsible for this great event. And I think that it gets bigger and better every year, and it's really wonderful that so many people do come. And I also congratulate Sandra Pepera and the team for the fabulous job they're doing. On behalf of this NDI's Not the Cost initiative, Sandra, we salute you and will follow you anywhere, I promise. We also salute all our distinguished visitors from overseas, and I thank you for joining us. It has been fantastic to listen to you and to share stories around the lunch table. Your presence in Washington gives you a priceless chance to see close up how the American political system operates. And I only ask that once you figure it out, you explain it to me. I know that this afternoon I'm expected to say wonderful things about women, but I worry that I might not be appropriate for 3 reasons. First, I've been a woman all my life, and this leaves me open to the charge of bias, to which I plead guilty as charged. Second, I've just written a book about fascism, and by an amazing coincidence, all the villains in it are men. So I don't want to pile on. And finally, as Nazanin and the other participants in our spectacular pre-lunch panel made clear, women are already doing a great job and telling it like it is. So All a keynote speaker can do is to stay out of the way and let the brilliant and gutsy women from around the world kick butt. Of course, there's some more elegant way to say that. It's good that we have so many activists on the front lines, because our theme today and that of our Not the Cost campaign is how to halt violence against women in politics. This goal could not be more vital or timely, but I want to make one thing clear. Decades ago, when I first started to speak out on the topic, it was customary to only think of women as victims. We were supplicants asking the strong for sympathy and help. We were outsiders who had to be satisfied with tokens in the form of a single small seat at a very large table. We were told to be patient and to settle for progress one step at a time. And the only right we were really encouraged to exercise was the right to remain silent. We were also expected to find comfort in the role of victim, to be the objects of pity without the responsibility to act. But my message today, and NDI's message, and the message of the advocates, dreamers, and doers in this room, is that women have finished with the role of victim. Women today are leaders, legislators, diplomats, warriors, peacemakers, professionals, aviators, athletes, artists, educators, and a million other things, and we can do them all at the same time, but we are not victims. We have long since moved beyond the point when it might be said that so-and-so does something pretty well for a woman. The era of condescension has passed. The fact is that we have been doing very well for a very long time, and that's precisely what makes the haters so angry. Because what really bothers the predators, the harassers, and the bigots is that they are afraid to compete with women on equal terms. They are the true victims of fear, the real objects of pity, trapped in a web of their own insecurities. They are pathetic, but that does not mean they are harmless. On the contrary, we have learned through history that when democratic movements of any type arise, they inspire and liberate, but they also generate opposition from those who have power and refuse to share it. This opposition takes many forms, but violence is one of them. In Honduras, early in 2016, the environmental activist Berta Cáceres was gunned down because she threatened to derail a controversial dam project. In June of the same year, British parliamentarian Jo Cox was shot and stabbed to death because of her support for the European Union and for legal immigration. The man who killed her called her, and I quote, a traitor to white people, unquote. The following month in Burundi, Hafsa Mossi, a member of the East African Legislative Assembly, was assassinated. We don't know why, we don't know by whom, but we do know that a courageous voice on behalf of peace was forever stilled. Just 7 weeks ago, a city councilor, Marielle Franco, was murdered when assailants in Rio de Janeiro raked her car with bullets. Marielle had been a longtime critic of police brutality. The bullets were from a batch bought previously by the federal police. These and other prominent crimes have attracted an awful lot of attention, but the majority of violence towards women in politics takes place far from the public eye, behind closed doors, in the form of assaults and threats and vicious comments, whether direct or through the social media. Last year in Mexico City, I met with an NDI grant recipient who was proud of their success in recruiting more female candidates, but worried about the harassment they were facing. Some of this violence is physical and some psychological, but in either case, the bruising and the scars are real. I was also in Ukraine last year and heard of women in political life being targeted by the online circulation of fake nude photographs, but that's one case in many. Have no doubt, a cyberbully has the same purpose as a conventional bully, as we heard, to force women who are in the public arena to get out and to deter those who have not yet decided from getting in. Often, these attempts to intimidate are grounded in political differences, but frequently they emanate from party colleagues, as well from men who agree on ideology but don't like having to share the spotlight with women. In the book that I've just written on fascism, I note that authoritarianism comes in a variety of shapes. There is no one model, but there are certain common characteristics, and one is the need that all tyrants have to exercise control and bend others to their will. To that end, they propagate the myth that those who oppose them are less than human, that they're not equal in dignity and worth because of what they think or where they come from or the language they speak or the color of their skin or their sexual orientation or gender. This propaganda is reinforced by words that dismiss and demean, by physical cruelty aimed at generating submission, and by policies designed to prop up the strong and hold the disadvantaged down. Adolf Hitler's promise to women was, quote, emancipation from emancipation, unquote. In the Third Reich, he said women would not have to worry about the burden of being free. More recently, the president of the Philippines suggested that female rebels should be sexually assaulted or shot in the vagina. Earlier, when he was mayor, he joked about a female missionary who had been gang raped, then murdered, saying, and I quote, "I should have been first in line," unquote. In too many countries today, including Hungary, Venezuela, Turkey, and Egypt, authoritarian leaders have grabbed the pendulum of history and swung it into reverse. Women are among the principal targets when civil society is repressed, journalists are thrown into jail, judicial systems lose their independence, and elections are drained of their meaning, because that is when the voices of change are drowned out and the status quo controlled by the fraternal order of despots is reaffirmed. Here in the United States, those of us who followed the 2016 presidential campaign don't have to dig very deeply into our memories to recall the 6 signs, slogans, and sneers. As for Russia, I wish someone would remind Vladimir Putin of his rightful place in history. After all, his first name isn't Catherine, and his last name isn't Great. As I said, there are many models of tyranny, from outright fascism to what some have labeled illiberal democracy, an oxymoron. But dictators of all stripes count on good people failing to act as they should, either because they are confused or divided or afraid. Fascists thrive amid silence. Democracy, however, depends on people who have courage to speak up, join together, and fight back against injustice. It depends on people who refuse to be intimidated or to bury their ideals, people who insist on the truth. And that's why NDI launched its Not the Cost campaign to ensure that women everywhere have a fair chance to participate in the political life of their countries. With that purpose in mind, we are employing every tool at our disposal, from the use of focus groups to the collection of more accurate data, to connections made through social media, to the design of election observer missions, to the drafting of model laws, to partnerships with regional bodies and the United Nations, to the mobilization of public opinion around the equator and from pole to pole. We recognize that women have come a long way, but now is not the time to let up. It is the time to press even harder for lasting change. We also recognize in all that we do that a woman alone, like a man alone, can be made to feel fear. But when women are united, no one can push us around. So let's be clear. For women, violence is not a rightful or inevitable cost of participation in politics. Participation in politics is the way we will end violence against women. So I leave you with one request, which I hope you will share with women and friends of women everywhere. Whether you wear a ceremonial dress or a pantsuit, a hijab or a sari, whether you are standing on a dirt floor or bumping up against a glass ceiling, this is what I'm asking you to do. Help to make our voices heard in the voting booth, in the legislative bodies at all levels, in multilateral organizations, in the courts, in the media, in civil society, in the workplace, in classrooms, and in the home. You know that statement now, see something, say something. I have added to that, do something, and that is our to-do list. We need to make our voices heard in 100 different languages, wherever questions of freedom and dignity and human rights are at issue. And let the word go forth. As women, we are not asking for our rights. We were born with our rights. We do not need anyone's permission to practice them. If you attack one of us, you attack all of us. But if you stand with us, we can and we will make the world freer, more peaceful, and more just than it has ever been. It took me a long time to find my voice. I am not going to shut up. Thank you for helping me. Thank you. Thank you.